Ahoy VC, welcome to the Personal Oasis. This is the Blind Island. I'm your host, Isaac, and today I am visited by the indelible Chris Propfe. How you doing today?
Good.
Good.
It feels good to be in my personal oasis, but on the Blind Island as well. So great to see you, Isaac.
Well, it's a real pleasure having you here on the channel and to be talking about, I would say, a pretty seminal metal album. For a lot of people, this was their introductory record into the metal verse. And that one, of course, is Judas Priest's Screamin' for Vengeance. And I just recently purchased this one for $1 at the exclusive company.
Now that looks like an early pressing of the album, right?
Yes, this is an original Columbia from 1982. And
I have a reissue, but
yeah, it's in fairly good shape. Like the record's in good shape, but on the back there's some water damage. But that's for $1, I couldn't say no.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, like that. It's usually I see these for like $15-$20 most places. So
What's the actual vinyl look like on it? Is it pretty good condition?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The vinyl is in very good shape. I would say bordering on VG plus, but to be conservative, I'll call it VG because there's a couple of hairline scratches.
Right.
Depends on what system you'll be playing it on, I guess. But it plays through, and I mean the music is so loud though that any background noise doesn't really matter on this one.
Right.
So. But yeah, I wanted to ask you to review this one for me because it's no secret that you're a huge Judas Priest fan. And since I'm fairly new to the Judas Priest lifestyle, why don't you give us a little background information on this record and kind of where Judas Priest was at the time they released it?
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, when we discussed this album, last week or whenever it was, I went back in. Of course, I know the album, but the last couple days I've been listening to it again, and I think that looking back at the history of Priest, in the '70s, I think they were still trying to find their sound, and I like the first couple albums. Like I like Sad Wings of Destiny and Rock-a-Rolla. I think they have more of like a bluesy metal sound. And then I like a lot of the 70s albums like Stained Class, Sin After Sin. Those are killer albums. But then in 1981, they came out with an album called Point of Entry, which to me, it's a very, very strong album, but I think they sort of like lost their way a little bit. I think they were getting really heavy, and then Point of Entry came out, and it was sort of a little bit more poppy. You've got some great songs on there. You got Heading Out to the Highways on there. Solar Angels is on there. Desert Plains. It's a really strong album. But I feel like they were sort of kind of going a little bit more mainstream. And then, '82, they came out with this masterpiece where I think that they channeled the metal more. I can't remember who produced Point of Entry, but this album was produced by Tom Allom, who is a big-time metal producer, and I think that he really got the best sound out of Priest. And again, I don't know if he produced Point of Entry or not. But, this is the classic lineup, 1982, Judas Priest. You got Halford on vocals, Glenn Tipton and KK Downing on guitars, Ian Hill on bass, and Dave Holland on drums. So it's the classic lineup Priest. It opens up with the Hellion, which is this like little mini instrumental. And then you get into like a metal masterpiece like Electric Eye that they're still playing to this day. And you've got Screaming for Vengeance, the title track, which is like quintessential metal. It's like the metal handbook. Like anybody who wants to write a metal song should look at Screaming for Vengeance, the title track. And then, you've got one of their biggest songs, You've Got Another Thing Coming, on here. Now, for me, that song is not one of my favorite Priest songs, just because I've heard it so many times. And again, it's not that it's a bad song, but it's one of those songs that brought Priest to the masses.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if it's aged as well for me anyways.
Right.
But, you know, after this album is another one of my favorite albums by them. In 1984, they came out with an album called Defenders of the Faith.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think that Screaming for Vengeance was like Priest's, like, hey, it's the 80s and we're here and we're better than ever. And the Defenders of the Faith carried that on. And then they kind of carried that momentum. So I think it was a very important album for them, following sort of kind of a lackluster album like Point of Entry.
Yeah. Yeah, I went back and I listened to Point of Entry, and it almost has it has this very polished feel throughout the entire thing, and almost a glam type of quality to it.
Yeah, and there's some songs on there that are I just feel like they should have been fleshed out a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I feel like I interrupted you.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
It's just that I noticed like that this definitely seemed like a return to even heavier than they were before, like just kind of a raise the fist, like we are metal and that's what our identity is.
Along those lines, you're exactly right, because I've heard Rob Halford in interviews basically saying that Priest they assumed that position of like metal. I mean, Halford's known as the metal god. Mm-hmm. And I think he just said, you know what? We're going leather, we're going spikes, we're going the full heavy metal look, sound, everything. They embraced it. And we're like, if you think about Black Sabbath, like Black Sabbath came up with in the same era as Judas Priest, as did Deep Purple. Deep Purple went the blues route. Mm-hmm. Black Sabbath stayed metal, but they sort of got a little proggy towards the end. Mm-hmm. Priest actually, like you were just saying, they got heavier, and they almost said, you know what? No apologies. We're a metal band, and we're going to show you.
Exactly. And like another thing that I was surprised about while I was listening through this album is just how hooky this record is. There are lots of just really great choruses, and sometimes I think that people are a little turned off by metal because you just can't understand the words, or that you can't catch on to what they're saying. That is not an issue with this record. Halford is just, his diction is phenomenal. And I mean, he also brings this this spitting salvo that's kind of Johnny Rotten-esque to his vocals, that I think that a lot of people, if they gave it a chance, if they've never had any experience with metal or lackluster experience, this would be a good entry point for lots of people.
I agree with you. And to kind of piggyback on what you were saying about the pop hooks, when I was researching this album, I did not know this. There's a song on here, I just don't know which side to hold it on. There's a song on here called Take These Chains. Wait, right? Take These Chains. I didn't realize this. This song was written by a guy named Bob Halligan Jr. And again, this is not off the top of my head. I researched this. He wrote songs for Kix, Kiss, Blue Oyster Cult, Helix, some of the big 80s bands. And he wrote a song for the Priest's next album, Defenders of the Faith. He wrote the song, Some Heads Are Gonna Roll. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was pretty cool. Like, Priest was bringing in some outside writers. Mm-hmm. And I think that they deliberately did that. I think they wanted, they wanted that pop sound. I think they wanted to reach a bigger fan base. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was interesting. I didn't realize that. I had never heard of Bob Halligan Jr., but I guess he's a pretty big writer.
Yeah, I've never heard that name before. But, if they were looking to reach a lot of people, they definitely succeeded heavily with this record, because it's, double platinum that it sold, I think. It's ridiculous how many copies this album has sold over the years. But like for you in your ranking of Judas Priest's discography, where would this album land for you?
Yeah, that's that's an interesting question because I feel like a lot of times my rankings are like, I guess that's what they make. It makes it my ranking. I mean, I feel like I don't agree with a lot of people with rankings. Like, I'm thinking of Iron Maiden. I know we're talking about Priest, but a lot of times with Iron Maiden, people say Number of the Beast is the best album. For me, it's not Number of the Beast. Number of the Beast is actually a weaker album for me.
Mm-hmm.
But with Priest, where would this rank? I mean, definitely in the top 5 for me, because I got to put. I love the album Stained Class. I told you I love the album Rockarola. I love Sad Wings of Destiny. I love Sin After Sin. Those are all 70s records. Yeah, I mean, I'd probably have to put this in the top 5. That would be somewhere in the mix there. But it's not my favorite Priest album.
Right.
It's definitely in the top 5.
Right. Like now going on my kind of opposite reaction, because I've been singing praises pretty much this entire time, but the only thing that I noticed in this record is that it almost plateaus a little too fast. There is no crescendo or climax. It's just Hellion to Electric Eye, and your like eyes are popped, but then it's like, it just stays at that level pretty much the entire record, from what my ears took in. That was the only drawback for this album that I noticed anyway.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it opens up with that huge song, like you said, the Hellion and Electric Eye. I mean, that's just pure metal. I love Riding on the Wind. It's definitely not as fast. I like Bloodstone too. And again, Take These Chains is poppy, but I like that song. Pain and Pleasure is weak, though. I don't like that last song on the first side. And then, of course, side B, I think you follow the same thing, like you were saying. You start off with a banger like Screaming for Vengeance. Then you've got another thing coming. But then you end on 2 tracks like Fever and Devil's Child. I almost think maybe they should have ended with the song You've Got Another Thing Coming. I think that would have been a really strong ending to the album.
I agree. I feel like the track sequencing on here could have used a little tweaking so that it would cause you to just have a little bit more of an arc or an emotional feeling. Because, I mean, this is an album that's opened up my ears to realizing, wow, there is a lot of emotion to be found in metal, but I think that the track listing could have been tweaked just a little bit, and it would have really transcended to a higher plane.
I agree with you. Even if they just switched You've Got Another Thing Coming and Fever.
I agree, yeah.
Because, and it's funny because I was looking at those 2 songs because those are the 2 songs I really didn't know on this album, Fever and Devil's Child. They're not memorable to me.
Right.
Fever has this mellow intro, which is kind of cool. And then it gets into this sort of radio-friendly, like hair metal sound almost. It was like hair metal before hair metal. And then Devil's Child, to me, it had like an AC/DC vibe to it. Again, it was like a radio-friendly type thing. Sort of, it reminded me of something that would have been on Point of Entry. And that's interesting because I wonder if Devil's Child was written around the Point of Entry time and maybe it was shelved. I'm not sure. But it's not that they're bad songs. It's just that they're not very memorable to me. And I think if they would have just switched You've Got Another Thing Coming with Fever, that would have it would have made the album flow better.
Right, exactly. And what would be like, I know that you've mentioned a lot of the tunes on this album, already mentioned a couple of your favorite tracks, but what would be like the true, like if you had to pick 2 tracks off of here, what are the true highlights that you would suggest to somebody?
Well, definitely Screaming for Vengeance is one of them because, I mean, when we think of Rob Halford, we think of this screaming metal god. And, I mean, he definitely unleashed it in Screaming for Vengeance. The other song, I like Riding on the Wind. I mean, I know a lot of people would say, oh, you got to go with Electric Eye. And I like Electric Eye a lot. But I really dig Riding on the Wind as well. I think I did a top 10 of Priest
Mm.
a while back, like videos ago. I think I put Riding on the Wind in my top 10, if I'm not mistaken.
All right.
But yeah, so I mean, and it definitely, Electric Eye would be up there too. But this is
Mhm.
one of those albums, like, and I know a lot of people say this, like, ask me tomorrow and I'll have different answers.
Right.
I mean, it's true. Like, maybe if you asked me tomorrow, I'd say no, not Riding on the Wind. I'm going to say Electric Eye.
Right.
So, I mean, what about you?
Um, to me, I would go with probably Electric Eye and Riding on the Winds,
Yeah,
because I just that 1-2 punch.
yeah,
It really does. Like, the first side to me is the stronger of the two, if I
yeah,
had to make a choice. Um, and you have an excellent introductory instrumental track with Hellion going into Electric Eye,
yeah,
and then you have, I don't know, just those hooks. They really just get stuck in my brain. I
yeah,
can't like, and it's something that you can groove to as well. And then Riding on the Wind is very emotional. While I agree that Screaming for Vengeance is what you think of when you think of Priest.
right,
There is, or you think of metal in general. Just
yeah,
Riding on the Wind has, I think, a little bit more of an emotional punch to it,
right.
and I love that aspect to when a band reveals multiple layers. So those would be like my two choices. So we just flip flopped.
Those are great choices. Yeah, and
Yeah.
listening to you speak about these, I feel Priest was one of those bands that sort of they walk that line of like, we could be hardcore metal,
Hmm.
but we can also be more of that melodic metal.
Hmm.
Uh, you think of their song "Diamonds and Rust."
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know. I mean, you probably know this, but that's a Joan Baez song.
Yes.
So Judas Priest covered a Joan Baez song, which is very strange. And then they did a song called "Better by You, Better Than Me," which was a Spooky Tooth song.
Oh, that one I did not.
So, yeah, so Priest is covering Spooky Tooth. They're covering Joan Baez in the 70s. I think a lot of people didn't even realize that. They're probably like, oh, Diamonds and Rust, this is a cool song. But they didn't
Right.
realize it was Joan Baez. So I think Priest was good at, like, sort of, like I just said, walking the line. Like, hey, you know what? If you want that metal tune, here's Screaming for Vengeance. But we can also give you something like, Riding on the Wind or Bloodstone, where it's a little bit more melodic.
Right.
And I'm going to put this out there for anybody. I know we're talking about this album, but
Hmm.
if anybody's ever questioned Rob Halford's vocal abilities, there's a song on Sin After Sin called Last Rose of Summer. It is a beautiful, folky, acoustic song. And listen to that, and you will hear how good of a singer Rob Halford is. So if anybody's ever questioned, say, oh, all that guy does is scream, listen to the song Last Rose of Summer, because his voice is, he's got a very, very nice voice.
Well, and that's so interesting because I have heard, there are people out there that they just like stir the pot, stir the pot.
Yeah.
It's like saying, Dylan can't sing. Springsteen can't sing. It's like all they do is like squeal. Uh, it, it's incorrect. When you listen deeply, it's a choice that a person is making.
Right.
And even on this record, I feel that Halford isn't just screaming. He's doing a lot of different things with his voice.
Yeah.
And, it's very different from, I always have a hard time with contemporary acts because I feel that it's really impressive when you have a very good voice, but when you're constantly doing vocal acrobatics
Right.
just to do vocal acrobatics, it rings empty and hollow,
Yeah.
especially on every single song.
Right.
I think Halford, especially on this record, he knows when to do it, and
Yeah.
he knows when to hold it back and let the band uh, be the star of the song.
Right.
But
I agree with you.
and I think that's something that we're the guitar solos aren't telegraphed. The drum solos aren't just fills to be having a drop. It's very refreshing. It's funny when an album that's almost 40 years old is refreshing in contemporary landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think this album has aged well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it doesn't have that 80s production.
Right.
Like when you listen to the album Turbo, which is a couple albums later, it's got a total 80s production. And that's why a lot of Priest fans were like, what the hell is this, you know? But you put this album on, it's just got a classic sound to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like I had said earlier in this session was that I think Priest realized who they were, and they just really honed their sound with this album.
Right.
It shows. I mean, you can listen to it in, 2020, and it still sounds as good as it did back in '82.
Yep.
When I was 7 years old. No, 8. I was 8 years old.
Nice. I was not even a thought in my parents' worst nightmares.
You know what's funny though is I'm wearing this Judas Priest shirt, and I saw them. This is their latest album is called Firepower,
mm-hmm.
and it's killer. Like it is a great album. I suggest to anybody out there, if you have not gotten Firepower, pick it up. But I saw this tour with them. It was Judas Priest and Deep Purple.
Oh, really?
And the funny thing is, though, is like I've been a Priest fan since I was a kid, but I only just saw them like a few years ago,
mm-hmm.
And it's the only time I've seen them. But I can notch that off and say, hey, I saw Priest. The only thing with that concert though is that Priest opened for Deep Purple, which was it didn't work because Priest was just this firebomb. And then Deep Purple was sort of kind of a letdown because they're more bluesy and laid back. I would have had Deep Purple open for Priest.
Right. Well, and also the fact that Deep Purple haven't released any real new material in over a decade, 15 years, 20 years. Like, I mean, I don't know if they have come out.
They've had some new albums. They actually have a new album coming out in August.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the thing with Deep Purple though is Ian Gillan can't scream like he used to.
Right.
That was part of the allure of Deep Purple. Not just that, but you had Richie Blackmore, of course, and everybody, the whole gang. But Rob Halford can still scream. He can still bring it.
Well, I haven't listened to the full album yet, but because I knew we were going to be reviewing this, I went to other Priest albums and kind of sampled a few tracks from each one. And yeah, their newest album, he's still blowing smoke. It's not just a retread of the oldies. He's like really still has the cojones to back up.
So is this the one Priest album that you have, or do you have other Priest albums?
No, this is my first Priest album that I've ever purchased.
It's a great one to start with.
Yep, and because I see them a lot, but sometimes with newer groups or groups I'm just not incredibly familiar with, spending over $25 on something just doesn't. I try to keep almost all purchases under $10, so it just doesn't really tickle my fancy. But now that I've listened to this, I'm definitely going to start collecting more Priests in my collection.
And I'm going to tell you this: if you like the sound of this album, then I would go to their next album called Defenders of the Faith.
Mm-hmm.
I would have that be your next one to get. Now, if you want more of like their 70s sound, I would personally say I love the album Stained Class.
Okay.
I think if you either got Stained Class or Defenders of the Faith, you'd be a happy man.
Excellent.
Yeah.
No, so kind of wrapping up the review portion, what would your rating be out of 5 for this record?
Out of 5 on this record, I'd give it like a 4.8.
All right.
I don't know. Does that make sense? I don't think it's exactly 5, but it's real close. I mean, it's almost perfect. I mean, even songs like, I think Pain and Pleasure is the only one that's sort of like a throwaway track. And I'm even looking here. They probably didn't even need to include that on the album.
No, it's long enough.
Yeah, that could have been a B-side, really. And I was talking about Fever and Devil's Child. They're good songs. It's just, I think that they're just placed wrong. So I think that this album is very close to being perfect. And it's classic Priest, so I got to give it a high 4.
Right. I'm almost right there with you. I give it like, this is a very first for me. It's a 4.25. I've never given anything like either a 4 or it's either 4 or 4.5. It's split right there because just like for the reasons I gave earlier, just the track sequencing just is a little too jarring on side B for me. And the fact that it just starts off so freaking phenomenally on both sides, only to kind of peter out. But that's like small, very small criticism. Overall, this is a very impressive album, and like you said earlier, has aged incredibly well.
Oh yeah.
And,
look at that artwork.
I know. I love the artwork. Did the same artist do their artwork for a couple of albums? It seems like Defenders of the Faith.
Yeah, because if you look, I mean, Defenders of the Faith has a very similar album cover. Turbo does as well. I think it was the same artist, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah,
the artist's name is here, but it's hard to read.
Yeah.
I think that they had the same artist.
Yeah, it's a sweet record. Total bang and pickup for $1. I can't believe.
That's amazing.
But absolutely, totally recommended. And I would have to say it's a very strong metal album and a great place for any beginner or novice to get started in metal. Yeah.
I mean, you're right. I mean, anybody, if you want to play metal to somebody, like you said, hand them this album. I mean, this is like Metal 101.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
This album, man, like, if you throw a Sabbath album in the mix and, you're good to go.
Yep. Throw in Masters of Reality and it's like, here you go. Get started.
Yep.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for just taking the time to review this record with me, and your thoughts, your knowledge were very, very helpful during this one. Definitely needed your expertise.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. This was fun, and I learned things too. Like I said before, I didn't realize that they brought that outside writer in, who had that Bob Halligan guy. I didn't realize he wrote for bands like Kiss and Blue Oyster Cult, things like that. So, when I listen to these albums again, I go research them, I learn things that I didn't know. So it was great for me to do this too.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, everybody on my channel. If you haven't subscribed to Chris, go over to his channel. He has some amazing stuff, always learning new things from him. So definitely give him a subscribe. And Chris, thank you again for joining me. Really appreciate it. And I hope that everybody has a great day on their own personal oasis.